Hello, students. Welcome to our lesson 4 of World History 2 course, and it is entitled The French Revolution. Without further ado, let me start discussing it. So let's start with the old region. In 1789, France was in a severe economic crisis and was still governed by an archaic class system, meaning during this time, it was too difficult for the country or the nation of France in terms of economic and because of the old setup or old situation in terms of society. And the first estate is called the clergy. Under the clergy in 1789 also, French clergy still enjoyed enormous wealth and privilege. The church owned about 10% of the land, collected tithes, and paid no direct taxes to the states. At that time, many high church leaders, such as abbots and bishops, were of the nobility, meaning they are in the higher rank, while many priests had humble origins and were poor as their congregations. The first estate did provide some social services, such as hospitals, schools, and orphanages. Going to the second estate, this is called the nobles. The nobles were titled nobility of French society. Also, many of them were of the middle class, and they have not been elected, but rather they've been appointed with the position by the absolute monarchs seeking their support. Others also, in the second estate, had inherited their titles and feared losing their traditional privileges, such as not having to pay taxes. I'm guessing at this time, tax was too high, and that is why this is such a huge privilege for for most people back then. The third estate is called the majority of the population, and this is 98% of them included bourgeoisie, which is the middle class. This is 9 out of 10 poor rural peasants. They're mostly paid, or they mostly paid the taxes, although they were the largest and poorest state. Imagine that. Imagine the imbalance of the case or the class system during that time. And because of this, it led to much discontent and dissatisfaction with the other estates. Because of these situations, there have been a lot of economic troubles. King Louis the 14th had left France severely in debt, following several wars, plus having a lavish court cost money. The government during that time borrowed millions, and by 1789, half of its tax income went to paying interest on this enormous debt. The government needed to increase taxes, but the nobles and clergy resisted any attempt to end their exemption from paying taxes. So, in this situation, they were kind of like resisting or fighting to keep their privilege. But in the late 1780s, bad harvests sent food prices soaring even higher, causing even more discontent. There has been, I'm guessing there has been a bad forming, or yeah, it's just here bad harvest. Louis the 16th hired Jack Necker, a financial wizard, as an advisor in pursuit of hopefully solving this situation. And he proposed taxing the first two estates and reduced court spending. The nobility and the clergy forced the king to dismiss him. Because of this situation in the States General, um, France went bankruptcy, and the king during that time has been called for the first time in 175 years. And first major problem that they had was the election or the voting. And this time, the third estate wanted all three to meet as a single body and vote by head. After weeks, the delegates of the third estate took a daring step. and they claim to represent France. They call themselves the National Assembly, and that makes sense because they are like the majority of the population, like 98%. So they should also have power over the nation. So this is the situation that has happened. The National Assembly, which is the third estate, the 98% of the population, invited members from the other estates to join them in writing a constitution. And this is what they called tennis court oath. They agreed to meet whatever circumstances required until they had a sound and just constitution. And why is it tennis court oath? Because a few days later, they found themselves locked out of their meeting hall. Fearing the king planned to dismiss them, they moved to a nearby tennis court, and that's where they did the oath. So during this time, when some clergies and nobles joined the National Assembly, um, King Louis had a hard time accepting it. And on July 14, 1789, the economy worsened. And also, the commander at the time refused to open the gates and fired on the crowd. And at this time, many were killed. And so it started the French Revolution. So, because of the political crisis and also the famine in the nation, it um, pushes the or pulled down the nation to recover or to get back on its feet. Also, there has been a huge increase in prices, most especially on bread, and a lot of people, 80% of them, or of their income, was only spent on this. And there's also a rumor that has abounded that government troops were seizing peasant crops, and in response, the peasants attacked back as well. The good thing about that is people in the National Assembly were not just satisfied with what's happening in their nation. And so there has been moderate reforms, especially in August 4, 1789, the National Assembly voted to end special privileges for the nobility, such as manorial dues, special hunting privileges, special legal status, and exemption from taxes. Another reforms that has happened in late of August, the National Assembly decided that there should be rights for man and the citizen, and it stated that all men were born and remain free and equal in rights. Also, there's natural rights and liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. And during this time, all male citizens were equal before the law. Of course, the king was slow to accept these reforms, and even a lot of Persians continued to grow discontent as more troops arrived in Paris, and many people were still starving. In of 1779, thousands of women marched on Versailles and they were shouting bread. Basically, they're demanding their rights, they're demanding that they should survive or they should live. And eventually, they forced the king and the royal family to return to Paris, where they were virtual prisoners in the palace. And during this time, the National Assembly presses onward, following the king to Paris, and soon adopted a constitution. Constitution of 1791, it limits monarchy, um, created a legislative assembly to create laws, collect taxes, and decide issues of state. They would lawmakers would be elected by male taxpayers, and this also ended church interference in the government, meaning there has been a separate um, state already. As this was going on, the royal family attempted to escape by disguising themselves, but were discovered and forced to return to Paris. Many now saw the king as a traitor to the revolution. Because of this thing going on in France, many monarchs outside France feared the idea of revolution, that it would spread even beyond France's borders. You have Austria and Prussia and other countries like Great Britain who were not in favor of this situation because of the like a poor performance or poor governance of the king or monarchy at that time. It has been abolished, and there has been a lot of things that have been reformed or been suggested or recommended. And so in January 1789, the National Convention put the king on trial as a traitor, and eventually he was beheaded. And Marie Antoinette or Madame de Pompadour would follow in October. So, in a way, the National Assembly got stronger because of the strategies or things that they did at that time. And another way was that to deal with problems caused by a war on many fronts and discontent within the republic itself, the convention created the of Public Committee of Public Safety. The 12-member committee issued a decree that required all subjects contribute to the war effort, and France soon overran the Netherlands and invaded Italy. So at this time, we are going to meet Robespierre. Maximilian Robespierre was a shrewd lawyer and politician who became leader of the Committee of Public Safety. He believed that France could achieve a republic of virtue only through the use of terror. So, as you can see, terror and war has not been ended in a way because of the other advocacies or the other ideas that people or leaders would have. And during this time, the guillotine, a device created by Dr. Joseph Guillotin to remove the heads of dissidents and political criminals. That's how they provide justice at that time. So, under the leadership of Robespierre, France experienced the reign of terror, where he crushed all opposition to the revolution. And 40,000 people died during this reign of terror, including the all different estates. You have the clergy, nobility, and peasants as well. And wary of the bloodshed, members of the convention turned on the Committee of Public Safety, and Robespierre was executed. And in response to the terror, another constitution was passed, the Constitution of 1795, set up by a five-man directory and a two-house legislature elected by male citizens of property. So the directory at that time held power for, let's say, 4 years. But it was weak and corrupt, and before long became very unpopular. And in 1797, supporters of a constitutional monarchy won the majority of seats in the legislature. With chaos looming, leaders turned to Napoleon Bonaparte for support, and he would soon become leader of France. You would probably be wondering, where were the women at this time? So, women of all classes participated in the revolution, and many were disappointed with the Declaration of the Rights of Man, just like what we have declared or mentioned earlier. But as the revolution progressed, however, women's rights to express themselves publicly came under attack, and many were sent to the guillotine. In 1799, there has been a lot of changes, or have been a lot of changes in daily life, had dramatically changed France. The old social order had been dislodged, the monarchy overthrown, revolution and war gave the people a strong sense of national identity, and nationalism would play a major role under the age of Napoleon. Revolutionaries pushed for social reform and religious tolerance. If you have been following the first slide up to the last, before this lesson, so the last slide about French people asking Napoleon Bonaparte for support, um, and Napoleon becoming the leader. This is by far one of my um, favorite lessons to discuss. Knowing Napoleon Bonaparte could somehow inspire and could somehow um, provide you a lot of learnings. So let's talk about Napoleon's rise to power. Earlier military career, the Italian campaigns. In 1796 to 1797, he conquered most of the northern Italy or France and had developed a taste for governing. Although in 1798, he was defeated by a British Navy under Admiral Horatio Nelson, who destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. This was the map wherein um, shows about the revolutionary France on how it has been established. The orange one shows the states established by revolutionary France, and that line, the red line or purple line, is the boundary of the Holy Roman Empire. That wasn't this was Europe in 1800 because the government was in a mess. Napoleon launched a successful coup d'etat on November 9, 1799. He proclaimed himself as the first consul, like Julius Caesar's title, and did away with the elected assembly, appointing a senate instead. In 1802, he made himself sole consul for life. 2 years later, he proclaimed himself emperor. So one of Napoleon's intention was to heal the divisions within the Catholic Church that had developed after the confiscation of church property and the civil constitution of the clergy. I wanted to see on the slide, the photo is called Code Napoleon 1804. Its purpose was to reform the French legal code to reflect the principles of the French Revolution, to create one law code for France. The one on the slide is the Louisiana Purchase 1803, wherein Napoleon Bonaparte sold Louisiana Purchase to the United States of America for $15 million. In December 2, 1804, this is the consecration of the Emperor Napoleon and the Empress Josephine. Here's another photo that shows that consecration. On the slide is Napoleon's throne. This is where he would sit to govern and to lead the nation. The Napoleonic Europe is or are the um, places or countries or nations where Napoleon has the influence or has the power. You have the Yellow France in 1789, acquisitions of Napoleon to 1810, the green one, dependent states of Napoleon, that's the red one, and then the blue one, allies of Napoleon. So, as you can see, Napoleon really has a huge power and influence during this time. One you see on the photo on the slide is Napoleon's major military campaigns in 1805, France versus Britain. So as you can see, this is the continental system. The yellow and then the blue color are the areas barred from importing British goods. And the one on the slide is I'm assuming, and probably the British cartoon back when Napoleon was reigning over France, and this was the image of Napoleon and his imperial throne at 1806. And this is the Peninsular Campaign of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1807 to 1810. So France um, proposed that um, he would invade Spain, Portugal. But Portugal did not comply with the continental system, so France wanted Spain's support to invade Portugal. But because Spain refused, what Napoleon did is to invade Spain as well. And this is the campaign of Napoleon's army battle. Um, the plan of Napoleon to invade Spain and Portugal, and it's called the Spanish Ulcer. So Napoleon tricked the Spanish king and prince to come to France, where he imprisoned them. He proclaimed his brother Joseph to be the new king of Spain. Now he stationed over 100,000 French troops in Madrid at this time. And because of the reign and governance of Napoleon, his empire continued to grow, and this is what it looks like at in 1810. And in July of 1812, Napoleon led his grand army of 614,000 men eastward across Central Europe and into Russia. The Russians avoided direct confrontation with Napoleon. They retreated to Moscow, drawing the French into the interior of Russia, hoping that its size and the weather would act as a support for the Russian. And the Russian nobles abandoned their estates and burned their crops to the ground, leaving the French to operate far from their supply bases and territory. So the one that you see on the slide, the photo is Napoleon's troops at the gates of Moscow. This was September 14, 1812, where Napoleon reached Moscow, but the city had largely been abandoned, and the Russians had set fire to the city. Eventually, this photo on the slide is Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, early 1813, where he had 100,000 French troops retreat. And this was Napoleon's defeat at Leipzig. This was already 1813 of October 16 to 17. And because Napoleon's plans at some point have not been succeeded, um, there has been a campaign for Napoleon to be abdicated. So Allied forces occupied Paris on March 31, 1814. Napoleon abdicated on April 6 in favor of his son, but the Allies insisted on unconditional surrender. Napoleon abdicated again on April 11, and this is Treaty of Fontainebleau. Exiles Napoleon to Elba with an annual income of 2 million francs. The royalists took control and restored Louis the 18th to the throne. And this was the proof of Napoleon's abdication. And this was Napoleon in exile on Elba. Here's on the map. Here's Elba on the map. It's the island near the Italy. Now, this is the War of the Seventh Coalition. In 1815, France against Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, smaller German states. Napoleon escaped Elba and landed in France on March 1, 1815, and this was the beginning of his 100 days. Eventually, Napoleon has been defeated at Waterloo in June 1815. And this was Napoleon on his way to his final exile on St. Helena. This is Napoleon's residence on St. Helena. With all the successes of Napoleon and defeat, eventually he was buried. And this was after he died, and this was his tomb. That's about it, everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that this gives you learning about world history.